Hi, everyone, and welcome once again to Connect Spring. I'm Peter Giannetti with the International Housewares Association, and this is Material Matters. A few housekeeping notes again before we get started. Our speakers today will be taking questions at the end of the session. So please go ahead and use the Q&A function to submit your questions at any time during the session. I'll pop on a little bit later and we'll take care of all those questions for you. These sessions are being recorded and they'll be available on the Connect Spring website at theinspiredhomeshow.com/connect within 2 weeks of the event conclusion, so figure around mid-April. I'd also like to take a moment to thank our session sponsor today, Triton Renew by Eastman. Please welcome Brad Moncla from Eastman Chemical Company. Brad, welcome.
This is Brad Moncla with Eastman, and Eastman is sponsoring this session as we believe that innovative materials will enable our industry to meet the expectations that consumers have always had for form and function, while delivering on the more recent need for sustainability. With recently launched products like Triton Renew, as well as commitments we have made to expanding our capability to consume waste plastics, Eastman is playing a critical role in establishing the circular economy, and we believe that sessions like the one today will continue to drive progress and foster collaboration across our industry. Feel free to contact me or visit us at eastman.com if you have any questions about our journey toward a circular future.
Thanks, Brad, and thanks to Triton Renew by Eastman for supporting today's presentation. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to explore what's now, what's new, and what's next in materials for the home and housewares business. IHA, Springboard Futures, and HFN have partnered with Material ConneXion on today's session and on an upcoming web micro-series for retailers and manufacturers. The goal of the program is to provide the home and housewares business with information and inspiration on material innovations and the opportunities they present. I'd like to start by introducing Tom MIrabile, founder and principal of Springboard Futures and consumer trend analyst for IHA, and Allison Zisko, editor-in-chief of HFN. They'll be speaking today with our guest from Material ConneXion, a global leader and advisor on material selection, product development, sustainability, and innovation. From Material ConneXion, we have Dr. Andrew Dent, who's the Executive Vice President of Research, and Dr. Gayatri Keshar, who's the Vice President of Research. Complete bios of our speakers are available on the Connect Spring page at theinspiredhomeshow.com. So let's get started. Over to you, Tom and Allison.
Thanks, Peter. This is without question probably my favorite session. I've always loved Material ConneXion, and it's just exciting to bring you guys. To me, Material ConneXion is one of those sort of silent heroes of the industry because they bring so much that a lot of us just aren't even aware of their involvement in. But let me start out by asking you guys, what is Material ConneXion? How would you describe it, and who do you work with, and how do you work?
Sure, thanks, Tom. Gotcha. I'll take that one if it's okay. Well, I think Peter did pretty well actually in his explanation. I mean, we are a resource. We're a partner. We work with every conceivable brand that uses material. So think about your average day, the materials that you interact with, the stuff that you see and touch. We're working in all those industries, whether it is home and housewares, but also fashion and footwear. We're doing architecture, automotive, consumer electronics. So all of those materials, we're basically working with brands and helping them either through our online database and library through physical samples, or working through it as a partner in consulting jobs. So we've been doing it for the last 20 years. And what we found is that there's a great value in the cross-pollination of materials. Often the solutions we found come from different industries. You work within your own silo, your vendors, but for us, what we like to do is to show you stuff perhaps you haven't thought of, that stuff that's existing currently in a different industry that maybe you can utilize. So that's really our value, is our library, our online database, our partnerships with brands, and also showing you stuff you haven't yet seen.
Outstanding.
Andrew, you have this expansive library of materials. Can you tell us a little bit about how you admit and curate materials for it?
Sure, yes. So we've got about 10,000 materials, I think, in our library. And we've been collecting for the last 20 years. And the idea really is just innovation and sustainability. We've got a global team. We have a team of researchers. Gayatri heads up that research team. We also have researchers around the world as well. And their job really is every month to deliver to us a certain number of innovative, sustainable new materials. We review them. We have a jury which assesses those materials, and we base them on innovation. Now, is it something we've never seen before? Is it like a more sustainable alternative to current materials that are out there? Is it something that perhaps comes from a different industry? We love to get stuff that's from aerospace, that's from let's say from pharmaceutical, from agricultural, that potentially could be used by our brands and our designers. And then basically, once they got accepted by the jury, they then go up on our website, and then they basically get pride of place for a month in our library. So it's a process that takes about 6 to 8 weeks, but we try and make sure that every month we've got sort of between 20 to 40 new materials coming into the library.
Andrew, let me ask you both something. When does a company turn to Material Connection? I mean, did they go to solve a specific problem, or just to sort of see what's out there, or why would somebody call you?
Okay, so why do companies turn to Material Connection? Yes, to solve specific problems. We have clients with very specific needs. Triton Renew as a sponsor of this session, and that sort of that has very specific performance parameters. If you're looking for something which is microwavable, can go into the dishwasher, has very specific needs, can inject injection mold very well, it's transparent, then that sort of solution would be a very specific ask. So we get a lot of those sorts of questions where they need to solve an existing problem that perhaps their material isn't doing as it should. Perhaps it can't deal with the temperature. Perhaps they don't have the right sort of colors. Perhaps it's expanding too much in some. So they have those sorts of specific questions, and we answer those with specific solutions. But we also have clients who just want to know what the trends are. When it comes to sustainability and circularity, what are the new things that are out there? What do we need to keep our eye on? So we do both specific and also that sort of broader understanding, because we've been doing this for a couple of decades and we've got a very broad reach. So it enables us to sort of see what's happening perhaps in different industries that might impact yours in the coming years.
I would like to add to that.
Oh,
I think one of the other things we have started seeing recently is clients do come to us as part of due diligence. Sometimes they have already done work in-house and they want to make sure that there are no gaps when it comes to research in specific area. Because as being industry agnostic, we are able to expand their research parameters and look outside their conventional supply chain to find those unique solutions that they may not have thought about before.
So you also, you look and basically they come to you and they say, okay, well, we've got this thing, we're ready to hit market with it. Have we dotted all our I's, crossed all our T's? Have we thought about things that, will make this the best product it can be? And you say, yes, no, and maybe here's some other materials you might consider?
Yes. Okay. So we will help them perhaps help their evaluation process with the materials or solutions that they have already identified, and also provide new solutions or alternative solutions in order to provide more comprehensive overview of that space.
So that means you have to sort of stay abreast of all of the the sort of legal ramifications of any material as well, right? I mean, that's one of the things that, so, let's say Prop 65 for tableware, and you have to look at what's lead and cadmium content and things like that. So you're also aware of those parameters when you're looking for materials in an industry?
Our team is certainly keeping up to speed in terms of when it comes to those region-specific regulations or sometimes industry-specific regulations. Again, based on the specific requirement, we can do deep dive to better understand if there are any specific considerations that should be taken into account, not just related to the materials, but as well as the manufacturing processes, or making sure that there is the right infrastructure currently available in order to work on the end of life or some of the other parameters that may play a role later in the process.
Outstanding. I think one of the things Allison and I were talking about was, do people come to you to help differentiate them inside of a marketplace? I mean, do people come and say, okay, well, we want to make something out of a plastic, but is there anything we can own or be first at, that type of thing?
I can take that one.
Sure.
Certainly being uniquely positioned in terms of the new material innovations as well as our global footprint helps us to better educate our clients. because our material solutions that are featured in the library or online database cover the entire gamut, from in development, ready to deploy, as well as commercially available solutions. So when the client is looking for that competitive edge, we are able to navigate them accordingly to make sure that they are familiarizing themselves with the new developments that are going on in the specific field. And sometimes they want to be the early adopters and have that early access to the technology so they can work together with the manufacturers to optimize it according to their own needs and be the first one to bring that technology to the market.
I believe you are located in New York, is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
So I'm curious, during the pandemic, how have you been able to convey the tactile nature of some of your materials virtually? I mean, it just seems like such a touch and feel kind of business. How have you adjusted to that?
Yes, that was certainly, at the beginning of the pandemic, when we had a serious lockdown, yes, it became a challenge. I mean, our location is still open. We still have visitors. We make sure that they are spaced to be safe, but certainly we still have that resource that we can have clients come visit. But, I think what we've managed to do for our consulting clients is we've just been adaptable. So what we'll end up doing, unfortunately for the vendor, we often request that they send out 2 or 3 sets of samples. So whenever we're talking over a Zoom, then all of us have the same sample set in front of us. So even though we can't have the face-to-face that we'd like to, certainly we can touch and feel the materials as part of that workshop or presentation. So it's just been that adaptability, in the same way that we're getting everything else shipped to us at the moment. We've done the same thing with samples, and I think it has been great because it's forced us to think more efficiently and differently about the way we, because typically it was, oh, everyone come to the library, it'd be amazing. And it is a great resource. But also now we have this other resource where now we don't necessarily have to take that plane ride to go and see a client. We can basically ship samples, we can do a Zoom, and there is a certain level of tactility there just because they've got the materials themselves in front of them. So we had to adapt, as many people did. And we found actually over the last year, thankfully, we're actually doing good business. We were affected just by the physicality of not people coming into the library, but certainly we're still do well in terms of our business revenues and our connections with our clients. It's working well.
Good. I'm glad to hear. In the same vein, the housewares industry has been very, as well as most of home furnishings, has been very focused on smart technology lately. So tell me, how do these materials that you develop that are so tactile complement the smart digital aspect of a lot of housewares products?
Do you want to take that one, Gayatri?
Sure. You're right that in today's world, we are surrounded by technology 24/7. And that's certainly helping us to, stay informed and well connected. But to a certain extent, I feel that we are losing touch with our surroundings, when it comes to like nature, outdoors. And materials are playing that important role in terms of bridging the digital world with the physical world. So using the right kind of materials can evoke different emotions in terms of comfort, warmth, and provide the holistic experience to the clients in addition to the original or the intended functionality of the products.
I have to say, I absolutely love that response because it's so funny. There was a smart technology session yesterday, and for those of you who didn't see it, see it when it comes back, when we start distributing these in a couple of weeks. But I think that one of the most important things, sometimes it's technology for technology's sake, and you have companies that just are like, okay, this is the latest, and it doesn't tie to people's need for the tactile. And I think that that's an absolute perfect response. And it's heartening actually to hear that a technology company, that somebody who lives on the edge of technology still has, the end consumer in mind, which actually sort of feeds into my next question. So, right now consumers are they have the wheel. Everything is about consumers. And like I've said before, the IHA has certainly, they work with us and a lot of other people to make sure that they stay focused on consumers. But how do how does Material Connection sort of stay in touch with, what consumers want? Like right now, there's a focus on time savings and space savings and, safety, security, all those things. How do you guys sort of stay in touch with those aspects of to stay consumer centric?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. Luckily, because we work with such a broad range of different brands, we often are privy to a lot of the consumer research that they do have. So we're often, as part of any project, they'll first bring in a whole bunch of data about what consumers are wanting right now. So we do learn a lot about that from the clients we have, and we learn it from different industries as well. I think, and our job is often, when a client comes to us, okay, I need something which is safer, which is more secure, which is more comfortable. What we need to do is to unpack that need into, okay, well, how can we satisfy it through specific material properties? What I mean by that is, so comfort has is it temperature comfort? Is it seating comfort? Is it softness of surface? So what we need to do is we understand that the consumer just wants to feel more comfortable. Okay, but our job is then to take that and say, okay, how are we going to do that with materials? And how do we then offer suggestions that provide for that temperature regulation, for that increased cushion, those sort of things. So it's constantly between what the designer wants, which is to create a thing of beauty which is covetable, what the consumer wants, which is ease of use and basically a streamlined, efficient process, and what we can deliver, which is sort of a bunch of material properties that most of the designer and the consumer don't really care about. What they care about are the end results. So our job is really to translate that from data points and graphs and charts through to understandable feeling once you actually interact with the product.
It's so funny because I think it's so easy to miss that. I'm reminded of when people were first starting to work with bioplastics, and you'd go to a company like Whole Foods, and they're so committed to sustainability, and you'd use a PLA spoon,
Mm-hmm.
and then it would melt in the soup because nobody bothered to say, okay, well, what temperature does this have to get exposed to?
Right. Yeah.
So I think it's really important to have that partnership of somebody who can sort of say, okay, have you considered all of these things? Gayatri, do you want to say anything about like consumer centrism and that position?
I would like just to add, like as Andrew said, once we have the data available, either provided by the client or sometimes provided by the research team based on our experience, we are able to decipher it in order to make sure that we are looking at it more holistically, because sometimes the clients get more sort of super focused on the specific problem that they're trying to solve. And sometimes the answer may be looking at it in a different way. And so rather than just focusing on the material, maybe it's the process that can solve the problem, or maybe it's the product design that can help to achieve the end result. So taking the step back and looking at it in what are the more sustainable ways to achieve that, whether it's a combination of different parameters, or whether it's just reimagining it in a way that the end result is still the same, but the process or the steps required to reach there are different.
So when you talk about the types of problems that people are trying to solve, I mean, in the past you've solved, materials, you've solved problems with, things like nonstick materials or silicone, and those introductions into our industry, which have been, they've not just advanced the industry, but they've been huge profit centers for a lot of people. They help consumers. They're positive all around. What kind of problems are people asking you to help them solve right now?
And do you want to take that?
Sure, I can do that. Well, there was a time when we were interested in price, performance, aesthetics. So price, performance, and design. Those are the three main things. Those are the things you need to hit. Now, it went from sustainability being a nice to have to a sustainability being like front and center must have. So that sort of is added an extra layer. And that sustainability can actually be a range of different things. It can be as simple as, I want to make this thing lighter, because if it's lighter, it's more easy to handle. If it's lighter, it's less to ship. It has fewer materials. There's health and wellness as well. I want to make sure that this product is completely clean. I want zero toxicity in my kitchen. I want zero toxicity to be touched by my family. So I think, sustainability has sort of taken on this sort of total viewpoint of sort of everything that we're concerned about with a product. How do we make it more efficient? How do we make it better? How do we make it just more enjoyable for the consumer? Sustainability has an aspect in that. So, I know we always talk about sustainability as a sort of this eco thing, but I think it's a little more than that. It's basically about the general perception of that product being efficient, lightweight, easy to use, clean, good, and then at the end of its life, you don't feel bad about basically, so you can recycle it in some way. It has a second life, a third life through its recycling, or, can it be disposed in some way quite safely? So I think, beyond just the specific performance, it's that how do you feel about the product? When you've purchased it, do you feel good about it? Is it great to use? Those are all aspects of sustainability. So I think it's sort of sustainability used to be this separate section. Okay, we've got to make it green in some way, recycled content. I think we've moved beyond that. We now want to have something which is just a better product all round, and sustainability becomes a major part of that, because it's how we approach them, the material, the product itself, how we use it, and how we dispose of it at the end of its life.
It's almost a core expectation now.
Yes.
An add-on. We'd asked you, Allison and I asked you to pull together some examples of, what maybe some materials you think might be interesting for us to see in relation to that topic, because we know sustainability is extremely important. So why don't you talk to us about that?
Great. I'll start. I can start with experiential materials. What we're going to do, we're going to go through quite a few different materials here. I don't want to go into detail about each one. I don't feel like, we don't get too granular. I kind of want to give you a sort of understanding of the sorts of things we're excited about right now, and just sort of gives you a relatively wide range. We didn't include a whole bunch of sort of more technical materials. We went more sort of like things that are just exciting to us because they convey a certain aspect that we see as a trend in materials. Okay, so let's go to the next one. Biocrystal powder, the ability of a material to give back to you. So adding these powders into fabrics, into foams, the idea is that basically the crystals themselves emit far infrared rays. Those far infrared rays warm up and improve the circulation of your blood. So basically, wherever you're sitting, wherever you're interacting with it, it's basically giving back in a sort of health and wellness way through a physical interaction of warming up the surface of the skin to sort of increase blood flow. They've shown it's actually very effective in improving injuries in horses. You now actually found that if you can put it into housewares and homewares, it actually also gives that same beneficial effect to us as humans.
That's terrific.
And this is a trend that just won't ever die. Basically, making things smell nice, but making things smell nice continually. Those fragrances as a way to sort of promote general health and wellness. We've seen the studies. That lavender affects, just sort of calms you down. Chamomile calms you down. Lemon tends to increase productivity. Mint does the same sort of thing. So how do we then have that as part of our products? Not in your face, intense smells, more just sort of like a general feeling that sort of it's making its impact without necessarily being too much. And the HumoFit, it looks like a relatively ordinary piece of plastic. It's a flexible material, but the idea is this actually responds to the body's temperature. It gets a little softer, a little more pliable, and sort of opens up very much like in the way a flower does when you actually get human touch near it. So the warmth of your body will cause it to become a little bit more flexible, a little bit more soft. So therefore, so you almost like you sort of melt into it in a way. But, it hasn't got a bunch of applications right now, but just that idea that it responds to us as humans is a nice idea.
And the materials that you've shown so far, are they, can we color them? Are they, will they take pigment?
Well, yes, I mean, we could spend a fair amount. I mean, yes, in theory, yes. If it's a plastic material, yes. If it's a plastic material, it can take pigments. So the idea is that these are sort of more of the base material. What we do is we tend to give a basic property, and then let the designer say, okay, you know what? I can make this into an incredible surface. Maybe I can put this into a cushioning foam. Maybe I can add this into my current product. So. Yeah, there's the base material, and then there's what you can do with it. And what you can do with it is often a wide range of different things. Colors, effects, different structures, that sort of thing. And of course, then there's the perfect soft touch surface. How do you get surfaces that are not only very, very soft and enjoyable to interact with, but also hard as nails? You know, this is a great example of it. It's just a laminate, but you know, we're used to having laminates as being a quite kind of very sort of septic and plain surface, and it's relatively hard. This is basically taking that to a completely different level. So the surface itself just feels like soft. It almost feels like suede, and yet when you try and knock into it or scratch it or burn it, nothing happens. So it's that wonderful combination of both hard and also soft.
And Andrew, what is this made out of?
It's a basic laminate, but it's the coating on top. So what you'll often find is that, you know, so the base material is the hard laminate. It has all that durability, fire resistance, that sort of thing. But it's a special source of coating on top, which is, I think it's a polymer chemistry. And the idea is that that then creates a so which kind of almost interacts with your finger in that basically it feels very soft to the touch without necessarily being soft itself. So you can't squish it down. You know, but basically, when your fingers interact with it, it's kind of like it's almost like it's a velvety surface. So it's that unique combination of hardness, but also the surface roughness creates that effect.
Wow.
And then sometimes it's just surprise and delight. This one's an injection moldable material, so you can mold this into various different forms, and yet it sort of mimics basalt stone. So it has that sort of very hard, very sort of granite, almost like look, but actually has wonderful moldability. And what we love this sort of thing, where you expect a certain thing from a particular material. Okay, it looks plasticky, or it looks very much like stone, it looks like glass, and yet through the manufacturing or the shape of it, you think, oh, well, it's an unexpected way of appreciating it. So that unexpected quality of disrupting your expectations about a particular material, that to us is a great way. And this one is a great example that you can actually use. It looks like solid surfacing for a countertop. One could mold very much more complex parts out of it, though.
I'm trying not to ask you questions because I don't.
I know, but my concern is
crazy.
You know, yes, we can certainly make this available to people afterwards, and you know, we have quite a few solutions. So you know, we're happy to take questions. My concern is just making sure we can get through everything as we go.
Okay. Well, you know what? Since you're jumping into some plan forward, I'm going to jump ahead in one of my questions just because it relates to this. Now, we haven't seen any of these before, Allison and I. So I'm just like I'm sitting on my hands right now. I have so many questions, but I just want to sort of jump off for a second and talk about sustainability because you're talking about plant forward solutions now, and this is going to relate. But I just want to get all of us, the audience, on the same page about something, because there are a lot of terms that we use interchangeably and probably not correctly so. And so like one of them is, you know, sustainability. You know, you hear sustainability, environmentally responsible materials. Can you just give us some definition to when people say sustainable? Is that always good? You know, what defines sustainable for what you do, and is that responsible always?
Okay, so I would happily ban that word completely from our lexicon because it conveys a lot, but it says nothing. Because what is sustainability? Okay, so if we think about that, for us, what we do is we break it down into the individual quantifiable, the things you can measure, those attributes. So something isn't sustainable, but maybe it contains recycled content. It's not, we don't call it sustainable, but it has renewable content. Maybe it can be recycled at the end of its life. Maybe it has a very low carbon footprint. These are not sexy words, but they're the words that are quantifiable. So you can say, okay, my product has now 100% renewable content. There's not a single virgin plastic in it, okay? That is something you can quantify, and that is something that has value. If you know, sustainable, green, eco, responsible, that sort of thing, they are words you can use. And I don't mind you using them, but if you don't put data behind them, then they don't have that much value. So for us, we talk about sustainability, but when we actually talk about the materials and the product, it's always, how do you measure it? What can you measure? And those measurements are, as I said, not particularly interesting to the consumer. But then again, say, you know, if you can suddenly make sure that every single bit of water you use in your manufacturing process is fully cleaned and goes out as clean as it came in, that to me is something you could market. If you do not use a single virgin plastic in your product, that again is something you can market. We know we're concerned about certain types of single-use plastics. If we can say everything can be recycled effectively at the end of its life. So these are things that are quantifiable, and also you can market based upon them. I would much prefer that than making any sort of green leaf or eco-responsible or sustainable claims, because those you
Yeah, I think that those, we have to start setting that standard. You know, I mean, and it becomes a competitive, it really does become a competitive issue. For if I can say that every drop of water that comes in to our production process goes out just as clean, that's a competitive advantage. So we've got to start establishing that standard. Gayatri, anything you want to add to that?
I would like to say that in addition to being more quantifiable, we also have to take into account different parameters that may affect the sustainable or the footprint of the product in general, because it varies depending upon what kind of application, it depends upon the geographical location. There are so many nuances to it when you are certifying or you are qualifying a material against some sustainability attributes. So there is certainly a need to have more sort of standardized ways, at least within specific regions, and making sure that the consumers are well informed in terms of the benefits or in terms of how it affects the overall process or the overall footprint of the product.
I think also with consumers, you have to speak to them. You know, I think a lot of people take advantage of the fact that consumers would have to learn something to understand this language. So as Andrew, as you said, you know, it's like, well, this is a word that they know, you know, but I think sometimes just speaking to them about what is saved and not getting mired in a word, but saying this is what doesn't happen, or this is what we preserve when we do this. One other word that I would love you to define for me, and everybody's tossing it around like a ball these days, is circularity. What is circularity? What does it mean? You know, do we get credit for partial, or does it have to be a full thing? Talk to me.
Okay, yeah, so it's become a very popular term. No current product, no current system that is outside of our natural ecosystem is circular. There's always some impact that does not get back into the system. Circularity means that everything goes in, comes back around, and so it's perpetual. So circularity is a slight change from basic sustainability, because circularity says, you know, we're not looking at the lowest carbon footprint. What we're looking at is everything that goes into the system, whether it's materials, whether it's energy, whether it's anything, and whether it's water, has to hopefully go back and become circular. So there is no material that's used that cannot then go back into the system and get used again. So what sustainability tells us is we want the lowest carbon footprint. So let's take a styrofoam coffee cup. In terms of carbon footprint, the styrofoam coffee cup is the lowest possible carbon footprint you can get for anything that contains coffee. However, at the end of its life, it doesn't get landfilled. It ends up as basically out there in the environment. So that's bad. So circularity says, well, it may be higher carbon footprint, but I prefer to use either something which is reusable, so we don't use a single use at all, but maybe we use paper instead, and paper can then be recycled effectively. So even though greater carbon footprint, it goes back into the system and gets used again. So no one's currently doing this perfectly. We're all taking baby steps. But certainly with Ellen MacArthur Foundation making sort of very clear statements about what circularity is, and I would recommend going to their foundation website. You can learn a whole bunch about the circular economy.
That name again?
Ellen MacArthur Foundation. I think she was a yachtsman or a rower, and she basically created the foundation, and it's great because it's a wonderful resource to learn. And it also points out, you know, some of the bad stuff we're doing as well. But I think with circularity, it's very much, okay, design and produce, assuming that everything that you're putting out there can potentially go back into that system. Maybe it goes back into your system, maybe it goes back into someone else's system, but it doesn't end up in the landfill. It doesn't end up out there in our oceans.
Andrew, can I ask how often are you asked to help your clients prioritize their sustainable goals? Do you guide them, or perhaps another way I can ask is, what do you think is if there was one single thing that housewares companies should consider in their manufacturing process to preserve the environment, what would it be?
Okay, that's a great question, because I'd always use the example of Levi's. Okay, Levi's produces jeans. And what we know about jeans is that they use a tremendous amount of water. They, through the irrigation of the cotton, through to the dyeing, and then the stone washing of the jeans. Water is their North Star. So what I recommend manufacturers do is decide what your North Star is. What is the one thing that has the biggest impact? So Levi said, okay, you know what? Let's forget everything else for a moment. Let's just concentrate on water. How do we reduce the amount of water we use? Let's focus on that. Let's try and, so that became their North Star. And every manufacturing process has it. There's the one thing, whether it is water, whether it's energy, whether it is the waste produced. Find that one thing and concentrate on that. Because if you try and tack everything all at once, you're going to chip away at it, but you're never really going to make any great sort of strides. And you can't really talk about, like, no one's really interested in you went from 25% to 28% recycled content. That's not something you can really talk about. What you want, so concentrate on one thing at a time, focus on that, often the one thing which is most impactful, the one thing that most people know about your manufacturing process, concentrate on that and attack that. And sometimes you might actually lose out on a couple of other smaller places, but you need to basically attack that main one, focus on that. And once you've solved that as best you can, then you can start looking at another. But I think it's very much, what is your North Star of sustainability? What is the thing that impacts you most?
Very good advice. So we've gotten you off the track a little bit. Do you want to go ahead and
let's get back to this? And your next session will be on world peace.
Gayatri, go ahead.
But yeah, let me let you get back to me.
Sure.
So on that note, let's move to the second part of it, which is plant-forward solutions. So as we were talking about, that sustainability is certainly an important aspect, but now it's more sort of a core of the technology. It's more embedded in the product experience rather than just having an add-on. And what we love about this technology, Karun, is it's a perfect marriage between sustainability and design flexibility. So this technology transforms rattan from palm trees and convert it into a material which is much more versatile than the standard wood material. So as you can see in the images, it can be easily thermoformed into 3D shapes. But at the same time, because of its unique structure, it has a porous structure, so capillary all along the length of the material, makes it possible to create very unique interactions with light or with air. So it can be used in a very sort of skin-like material, like whenever it's sliced like thin veneer. It can be used in 3D blocks. It can be molded into different shapes to allows clients to use it in a very different way compared to a standard wood material. And at the same time, it's also helping to preserve reforestation of endangered wood species. So that's, I would say, a perfect combination of tackling the problem without necessarily compromising on the design aesthetics or the performance of the base material. So the next one is we are seeing a lot more push towards finding residual waste streams that can be transformed into a valuable feedstock. And agricultural feedstock most of the times is burnt after use, and that creates or adds to more problems with air pollution. So there is certainly a focus in terms of how you can repurpose agricultural waste. And banana fibers, they are known for they are actually world's strongest natural fiber that's available and currently being used in various product categories. This company, what they have done cleverly is they are able to actually use it similar to how you use paper sheets and transform it into leather-like material. So in addition to using it as a substitute to natural textile fibers, now it can be used into products that will be able to create the same feel and same aesthetics as leather while using a waste stream. Depending upon how or where it is coming from, it is possible to manipulate the properties such that it can be really soft and flexible, or it can be really strong to provide the structural integrity.
Wonderful.
The next one is again from the same wood-based material, but we have seen quite a few innovations or developments when it comes to wood-based textile. And we like this the most because it is actually using real wood. So this is a real wood veneer that's been bonded to cotton. And so in order to provide more pliability, the surface has been laser etched. So there are like small pattern that has been created on the surface of the material that makes it really pliable. You can bend it, flex it, drape it, similar to textile, but it has that inherent qualities of wood because it is derived from wood. It can be dyed, it can be used in different aesthetics. And at the same time, even though it's a bonded structure, it doesn't take away the biodegradability of the material. So keeping the core in mind while offering new design and performance attributes. And the last one in this category is taking a different route in terms of completely avoiding the use of any fossil-based materials. Most of the times when we are talking about composites, we use natural fibers, or we have seen use of natural fibers in fossil-based resins, whereas this company is using different parts of wood materials in order to create composites. So it's a combination of cellulose, lignin, and binders that are also coming from vegetable oils. So it is completely removing the reliance on fossil fuel, and also allowing them to manipulate the properties. So as you can see in the images, it can be something which is really transparent. It can be white in color, it can be opaque, and also it is very structurally strong. By changing the formulation, they're able to create something which is more bouncy and has elastic properties. So like the applications are limitless depending upon what the end uses, while still keeping the product and the desired application in mind. You can also tune the end of life by making it biodegradable or recyclable. So that's a very clever way of, again, addressing the challenge, but without necessarily compromising on the performance or aesthetics. So next one is for Andrew. Are you ready?
I am, sure. Okay, so I love waste. Waste is one of my favorite things because I believe in the inherent value of materials, whether they're currently being used on your tabletop right now. Just because you put them in the trash does not change the value of those materials. So I'm always thinking and trying to help clients find ways in which we can utilize that waste. I don't want to throw anything away. I think it always has some additional value. You know, single-use plastics are a current problem for us in our oceans. We can reuse those materials. There are recyclers who will take that material and make it into all sorts of great stuff. So I'm always thinking about this. And this one is Flock, beautiful, beautiful trays. They do a range of different products. What they're doing here is they're actually taking some of the vast amounts of ceramic waste. So think about the amount of ceramic stuff that gets broken in the manufacturing, potentially also after consumers have used it. So they're actually picking that up and they're sort of compacting it into these products, firing it again, but making sure that they're basically using certain sections of certain colors. So in a sort of creative use of the speckled effect you typically get from bringing together a range of different colored pieces of ceramic. So this is what they're doing. So they're basically saying, okay, well, we accept it's waste. We're careful about how we put it back together again. We're going to press it and end up with a product that is perhaps even more beautiful than perhaps in a single color. So I think here is just a great use of waste material, of something that ceramic, which is really hard to recycle. I mean, at the moment.
Yeah. It's been a consistent problem. It's been a consistent problem in that industry. And so can this even be done with vitrified ceramic? Like once things that are post their firing and then defective product. I think that's one of the most difficult things because there's very little that can be done with it. Or is this like, pre-fired waste?
We have processes which are both post-fired and also pre-fired. So the post-fired, yes, it's also possible to do this process as well. What you get is, you obviously have to break it down into smaller parts. And that's one of the challenges you have, is that energy intensive process. You've got to break, think about a piece of a china plate. You have to break that down. It takes quite a bit of energy to break it down to small pieces, but it can be done. And then you can produce another one. So that, again, that's circularity. It's a higher energy process, but we can then at least put it back into the system again.
It's great to see a design aesthetic being applied to the material process as opposed to just, okay, well, we'll just, break it down and put it into this. Everything you've shown us has taken this waste and actually applied an aesthetic to it. I love it. I think it's great.
Yeah, I mean, I must admit, designers are my best people. I love them because they take that idea of design and they can apply it to anything. So get a designer look at your manufacturing process. They will come up with some interesting different ways of approaching it. I have a great belief in that. Okay, and what's our next one? Glazes that come from tree sap. So this is actually a studio, although he's Korean, he actually got a studio in the Netherlands. What I like about this is that we have accepted types of materials that we currently use. Why can't we use alternative materials? So this is actually using tree sap, and it's bonding it to the surface. And of course, what happens is it's a completely natural material. It basically, and it will wear off at certain points, but the idea is that you have this sort of studied and very beautiful sort of wear and tear from the material. So do things always need to look absolutely perfect at all times? I don't believe so. I think there's a certain beauty to things sort of wearing down, wearing out. So this coating on the surface acts almost as a glaze to the ceramic, so it protects the surface, but it's actually intended to eventually wear down.
Well, it's interesting because one of the design sessions yesterday, we were talking about one of the top 3 trends is Japandi, which is very sort of wabi-sabi, the beauty of imperfection, the beauty of use and life sort of being, a product being exposed to life and what it turns into as it exposed to that. So I think it's amazing. It's great.
Yeah. Next one. Yes, this one's actually, I love this one. This comes from the United Arab Emirates. And not surprisingly, from that location, it's actually utilizing sand. So desert sand, basically, it's a special firing process where they can put sort of quite high precision desert sand onto the outside of these containers. So they have a sort of, they don't feel rough in the way that, say, sandpaper would. There's definitely a smoothed over effect of each of the sand particles. They're compacted really quite well, durable, dishwasher safe, and just have a wonderful grip and feel to them. And they're actually directly from the sands of Dubai. And of course, yes, we continue to see this, the desire to be out and proud when it comes to using waste materials, putting them out there on the surface, as long as they have that sort of, as long as they have a certain aesthetic. So, we're okay with waste materials as long as they look the right sort of waste. And I think that's, again, one of our challenges is that we used to like things which look like perfect. Now we're okay with that sort of regularity, a sort of granola-like look, as long as it has the right sort of aesthetic. I think at some point we might get to the point where it, almost the haphazard way of which some waste materials can be recycled might be a new aesthetic as well. So I think, adding on to your comment, I think I also prefer things that make them look like they actually have had they've had a history. They've perhaps worn out a little bit. They have a uniqueness. You can see there's a story behind them. And I think these types of products, which are molded from waste materials, often using a bio-based binder rather than a virgin plastic, they're showing a level of story to the material that's perhaps just a touch better than your sort of injection molded high volume product that you're used to. More of the same, but using the translucency of some bio-based materials. We're seeing these as wall panels. We're seeing them as thermoformed pieces, and I think this aesthetic won't go away. I think also the ability to almost to see inside, to see what you did get, see what was there, what the waste material was, and acceptance that there is a certain level of waste in that product. That to me, I think is a great appeal. To the extent that people are putting wool into panels. These are molded pieces, and it's a company, I think it's in the UK, and I think they realize they've got a whole bunch of wool. They can't sell it all. Their sheep, I think, are too woolly. So they thought, okay, where else can we put it? And I think that the keratin in the fiber is really quite resilient, good fire retardancy, has a certain amount of thermal insulation, but just sort of, I think again, it's the designer's approach to this. Well, what if we threw this in there? It's the acceptance that not everything needs to be perfect. We can experiment. We've got excess material here. What can we do with it? And this is sort of a nice combination of a current UK wool producer and someone producing solid surfacing panels. How do we combine those two to create something which is kind of, it's unique and it's it's unexpected.
I think also there's a lot of of open to adopt when it comes to materials that cross industries. We tend to sort of put consumers inside silos and say, okay, well, you live in housewares, so that's all you're interested in. But that's not true. Consumers, the end consumer, they get dressed in the morning, they take a shower, hopefully, and then they go on. They're getting rid of clothes that they know aren't, and so we live as consumers. I keep saying, stop thinking of just your consumer. Think of them in the entirety of their day. And I think this is something that people are like, yeah, I'd love to see the clothes that I get rid of going into something. It's
Right.
wonderful.
Yeah. Paper. Basically, I think it's interesting to see the innovation we've seen in paper and wood. Now we've stopped using so much physical paper. So you had a whole bunch of people who are manufacturing a whole bunch of paper products, which we weren't using so much of anymore. So now they got very creative with what else can we do with it? Because of course that material itself, you can pulp it into a slurry. You can manufacture it into packaging. You can also produce much more durable products. It has, it's basically like a composite. It's these little cellulose fibers, and you can bond that with various different binders, and you end up with quite a durable product. So just the idea of taking the paper, which we think of impermanent and relatively fragile, and transforming it into something which is a lot more permanent, a lot more durable, simply just by the right combination of materials. And this one, the same idea. It's basically taking old newsprint, old magazines, and showing that material. So I think with the waste we're seeing here, it's possible to use waste materials and recycled materials. We saw that with Eastman's Triton. You can use recycled content and make it look perfect, and that is great. But I'm a firm believer in showing what the history of that material was. So this is another great example of sort of compacting that paper, but having that roughness to the surface, having a little bit of sort of the ability for it to sort of wear down a little bit. And at this point, okay, I want to sort of. We've got a couple more sections, but I'm also cognizant of time. So, Tom, how do you feel about? Can we carry on? Do you want to sort of like?
I was just going to say that I just want to make sure that there's nothing else that I really wanted to hit here. I know we've got some questions that I want to answer, but why don't we do this? Let's get through some questions because I want to do that. And as I've said before, I'm happy to say that. Allison and I are going to be working together to bring this to everyone in a micro series for HFN and through the IHA. So there's going to be more sessions about this. We're going to be attacking a lot of different questions. And but for the moment, before we get into a couple of questions, Allison, was there anything else that you wanted to cover? Prior to getting into viewer questions?
No, I think we've hit some of the major points. So let's give people an opportunity to ask some questions. And then if we have any time left over, we perhaps can see the remaining products.
Okay, great.
Well, hi, everyone, again.
Peter,
Thanks so much. Very interesting stuff. We have a lot of questions. We'll see what we can get through right now. But I want to start with one question and then sort of add on to it. The question is simple. Do you work with small businesses at Material Connection? And I'll presume that you do. At some point, but I think that maybe a more interesting answer would come from what's the advice you give to small companies, and how does that differ from the type of advice you give to larger, more established companies? How are the challenges they confront a little different, and therefore the process in terms of understanding material?
I'll happily take that one. Actually, I was on the phone on a Zoom call with a small business this morning. They're creating a product, and we were going through material selections as we do. And for small businesses, I think it's you have to focus on the story even more, because you have the opportunity to create your entire business around the story, and that story can be the material. Now, a big company is not able to do that because it's very hard for a major corporation to suddenly change and have it all about material, have it all about story. Whereas a small business, you can do that. You have you're able to adapt much more quickly, and you can make small changes, but then speak about those in a way which resonates much more effectively with in a personal way, I would say. So for me, with small business, it's very much, a lot of it's about story. A lot of it, maybe it's your personal story. Maybe it's that search you went through to find that material. So I think, and so for us, it's the story, the material can be front and center. For a big corporation, the material often is just a way of getting to an end point, which is lower cost, more sustainable, etc. for a small business, it can be the central, the core part of it. And we often focus on that because it's a very effective way of differentiating yourself. If all the other brands are using material A and you use material B, suddenly, you're noticeable. And if you craft a story around that material B and make it so that you've thought about the consumer, where they are in the world, what they feel about this material and its impact, then I think that's a very, very powerful story to have.
Interesting.
I want to just add a quick comment to that, because something that we've had coming up a lot. The consumer has never been more open to new brands, especially new brands that share their ethos, so to speak, or the way that they want to live. So to Andrew, to your point, it's a great time to be even a small company that starts with a new material has a larger chance, if you're really resonating about the way people want to live. And then, the adoption rate's much higher right now, especially among Gen Z and millennials.
It's interesting. I think a lot of the development you've talked about, this consumer-centric development from a material standpoint, it starts with the consumer and works back. I think people think from the old days, it was always some sort of happy accident in a lab that resulted in silly putty or the stuff that goes on Post-it notes, and the engineers say, "Oh, someone else will figure out what to do with it." You have to know what to do with it before you get going down the development. But it also talks to some things that, in a consumer-centric model, in today's world where there are economic considerations and all these things, is there a premium that consumers are typically willing to pay for a new material innovation? Or is that one of the challenges that goes into implementing the material right now? Anyone?
I can.
Sure, go ahead.
We have seen that there is definitely an appetite, as Tom was saying, especially with Gen Z and millennials, where if the core values and ethos of the company resonate with the consumer, they are willing to support that brand in their movement towards, more climate positive solutions. So I think sustainability is becoming, sorry to keep using that word, but I think that approach is certainly becoming the premium in the industry. People are willing to pay for it, and especially consumers are willing to support or back up those brands in order to help them achieve even more aggressive goals when it comes to being carbon neutral or carbon negative. So there has been a shift in consumer behavior that's at least been more beneficial for smaller as well as bigger brands.
With the emphasis again on the consumer, how granular and Andrew, you talk about the story that can be told. So really it's a marketing opportunity as well, but how granular do you want to get when it comes to discussing the material itself, the science versus the benefit, and what's the appetite for the consumer with regard to some of those details? And then the second part of that question is, how do you manage the responsibility you have not to misinform or create misinformation with regard to a new material? Because we know that if things go viral for the wrong reasons right now, that can create a bigger problem long term. So how deep do you tell the story on the material? B, how do you vet that story and make sure that you're not setting expectations beyond what the product can do? Okay.
I would give the example of Allbirds. If you've got a pair of Allbirds shoes, if you've ever seen their marketing, it's all about the materials. Of course, it's the world's most comfortable shoe, fair enough, but that's just one statement. It's very hard to back up. So what they have then is all of their marketing is around the materials, and they talk everything about the materials. And they've built their brand around that. So I think there is a lot of appetite for the right choice of material, the way that you talk about it. And I think you've got to be transparent. Our job really is to think about 5 years, 10 years down the road. So if you're using a material right now that we understand to be slightly problematic, if you think about Lego, okay? Lego's been trying to solve the Lego piece for a decade now. It hasn't got there yet, but it at least admits it has a problem. It's using ABS, which contains styrene, and we know that styrene, although it's a clean enough plastic in its production, there are some challenges. So they're trying to remove, so they're already thinking, okay, at some point, maybe they're going to want to start restricting the use of styrene in their Lego pieces. They need to have that solution. So we're already checking about those sorts of things that in 5 years, 10 years down the road are going to be problematic. So we're fully aware of those concerns because we know the base chemistry. We know when it comes to a certain plastic, the chemistry inside, you know, which ones are cleaner, which ones are more problematic, and we can do that with most materials. And that's our responsibility, is to make sure that when customers come to us, when they say, okay, I'm thinking of using this material, we can say, okay, well, yeah, this is good, but be aware, at the moment, this material does use a huge amount of water in its production, and that could be a concern later on. So we try and educate as much as possible, but I would definitely go for it with the material, because the material can be the great story, and I think that's been shown with companies like Allbirds.
Peter, I just want to say something here. So Greenprint just released 3 days ago their 2021 Business and Sustainability Index. 64% of Americans are willing to pay more for sustainable product, but 74% don't know how to identify them.
Right.
78% of people are more likely to purchase a product if it's clearly labeled as environmentally friendly, and why. So I think, to Gayatri's point, the appetite's out there. It's just a question of delivering the information.
Yeah, and again, to both their points, they will dig into that information a little deeper to make sure that they feel it's credible and it's substantive. It's interesting. We talk a lot about the role of the engineer, the consumer, and the manufacturer. We haven't spoken a lot about the role of the retailer in this, and oftentimes the retailer is the most important conduit to the consumer, even though that's changed with direct-to-consumer and e-commerce. Is there any program in place right now to get retailers more in the loop on this education, not just the manufacturing side of it, that is speaking to the consumer, because the retailer still has a big voice to the consumer?
Yes, I mean, they do. You know, often what we recommend is try and make, you know, remember selling beds, you know, and selling beds and mattresses. You know, the idea was always no innovation is going to be of any value unless some kid with a hangover who's trying to sell that bed can't explain it in 2 sentences. You know, I think so. Like, there needs to be that simplification. So that's the idea. How do you make sure that the innovation is immediately transferable through so the retailer doesn't have to think an awful lot in order to deliver that value to the consumer? It needs to be a slam dunk. It needs to be super easy to understand, whether that's visual, whether that's, you know, there is a simple visual or a simple tagline or something like that. That's the way we can best help, because our job is to take the complex and feed it to the manufacturer and the designer. That then the marketer then needs to be able to take that potentially complex material and then immediately allow it to be translated through to the consumer. So the best we can do for retailers is give them something easy to deliver. As for actual other methods, I mean, yes, I think, I don't think there are necessarily hard and fast rules. I think it's just simplification, because we as consumers have so much information bombarded at us. There's so much going on. It's very hard to tell what is truthful, but it's amazing how a simple logo, simple tagline, sometimes simple certification, you know, a recognized, you know, USDA bio-preferred. That's a simple one. We trust the USDA bio-preferred. Okay, it's got bio-based materials. It's a simple way of actually showing to the consumer, okay, it's been tested by the government. We know it's it's recognizable. That at least is something that I can then trust.
Well, that's great. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. Tom, I know there was some information you wanted to share with the audience before we wrap up today.
We just want to make sure that people know how to contact Material Connection. So why don't you give the best way to contact you? We know materialconnection.com. It's spelled MAterialConnexion.com. There it is.
Thank you, Tom. Yes.
We could talk to you guys all day. We'll be seeing you all on future sessions. Thank you so much. It's been amazing. And we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Allison. Thanks, Peter. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Hang on a second. I want to thank Gayatri, Andrew, Tom, and Allison for an interesting conversation. This wraps up our session for today on Material Matters. Again, I'd like to thank our speakers and our sponsor, Triton Renew by Eastman, as well as everyone for attending. As mentioned earlier, these sessions will be posted on the IHA Connect Spring website in mid-April. And again, thanks for your participation. We only have a couple days left of Connect Spring. It's been great so far. We hope to see you at the last few sessions. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.